For as long as I can remember, there was an unspoken rule in our house. My older sister was the perfect child, and I was just an unwanted burden. I never complained. I just stayed quiet. I stayed quiet even when my sister's fiancé, the wealthy, respectable man everyone loved, started sending me disgusting messages, touching me inappropriately whenever he caught me alone. For 2 years, I endured it in silence, terrified of ruining my sister's happiness. But exactly 1 week before the wedding, I couldn't take it anymore. I took my phone to my mother. The proof was right there on the screen. The inappropriate messages, the voicemails, the terrifying photos. I thought that, after a lifetime of ignoring me, my parents would finally protect me. Instead, my mother threw my phone across the table. "You are just jealous," she said, looking at me with pure disgust. "You have always been jealous of your sister. We are finally merging with a respectable family, and you are trying to destroy it just because you can't stand seeing her happy." I was called a liar. My father called me a disgrace. I made one last desperate attempt to warn my sister, but she looked at me with absolute hatred and pushed me away. And that very same night, my parents packed my bags and kicked me out of the house. If you have ever spent your entire life being treated like an outsider by your own family, only to be betrayed when you finally told the truth, please, stay with me until the end. And if my story touches your heart today, please take a moment to subscribe to our small channel. Because years later, when my sister finally discovered the horrifying reality of the monster she married, the apologies my parents tried to offer me were completely beyond belief. My name is Sophia. If you were to walk into my childhood home and look at the walls, you would immediately understand everything you needed to know about my family dynamic, without anyone having to say a single word. The living room walls were covered in framed photographs, achievement certificates, and glowing newspaper clippings, but they weren't mine. They all belonged to my older sister, Elena. Elena was the golden child. She was 3 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, she was absolutely flawless. She was the varsity cheerleader, the straight-A student, the girl who never had a hair out of place and always knew exactly what to say to charm the adults. My parents adored her. They didn't just love her, they worshipped the ground she walked on. And then there was me. I was quiet, introverted, and completely average in almost every way. I liked reading in the corner of the library rather than going to parties. I got B's in school instead of A's. I wasn't a problem child, but in a house that demanded perfection, being average was treated like a profound disappointment. My parents never abused me physically, but emotional neglect leaves a very different kind of bruise. It is a slow, quiet ache that you learn to live around. I learned very early on that the best way to survive in my house was to make myself as small and invisible as possible. When Elena wanted to go to an expensive summer camp, my parents eagerly wrote the check. When I asked if I could join a local art class a month later, my mother sighed heavily, rubbed her temples, and told me that money was tight and I needed to stop being so demanding. I grew up wearing Elena's hand-me-down clothes, watching my parents shower her with affection while I sat quietly in the background. I never complained. I never yelled or threw tantrums. I just accepted that in the story of our family, Elena was the shining star, and I was simply the shadow she cast on the ground. I thought that if I stayed quiet, if I never caused any trouble, my parents would eventually notice me. I thought they would eventually see my worth. I didn't know that my lifelong habit of staying quiet was exactly what would trap me in a living nightmare years later. By the time I was 22, the gap between Elena and me had only widened. She had graduated from a prestigious university and immediately landed a high-paying job in public relations. I, on the other hand, was working a modest job as a graphic designer, living in a tiny apartment on the other side of town, barely scraping by. It was during this time that Elena met him. David. David was a junior partner at a massive corporate law firm. He came from old money, the kind of family that had buildings named after them in our city. He was charming, incredibly handsome, and aggressively wealthy. When Elena brought him home to meet our parents for the first time, my mother nearly fainted from sheer excitement. To my parents, David wasn't just a boyfriend. He was a trophy. He was the ultimate proof that their perfect daughter was going to have a perfect, high society life. My mother instantly began treating David like royalty, hanging on to his every word and bragging about him to anyone who would listen. At first, I didn't mind David. He seemed polite enough, if a bit arrogant. But about 6 months into their relationship, things started to change. It started with small things that I easily convinced myself were just misunderstandings. We were all at a family barbecue in my parents' backyard. I was standing in the kitchen, washing some vegetables, when David walked in to get a beer. As he squeezed past me in the narrow space between the island and the counter, he pressed his body against mine, lingering for just a second too long. His hand brushed against my lower back, trailing down slightly before he pulled away. I froze. My heart started beating a little faster, but I immediately scolded myself. It was an accident, I thought. The kitchen is small. He just bumped into you. Don't make a big deal out of nothing. But it wasn't a mistake, and it didn't stop. A few weeks later, during a holiday dinner, I was sitting at the dining table while Elena and my parents were in the other room. David sat next to me. He leaned in close, so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, and whispered something into my ear that made my blood run completely cold. "You know, Sophia?" he murmured, his eyes scanning me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Elena is beautiful. But there's something about the quiet ones like you that I find incredibly distracting." I pulled away instantly, my face flushing hot with panic. I looked around the room, terrified that someone had heard him. But the room was empty. I didn't say anything to Elena. How could I? She was desperately in love with him. My parents were already planning the wedding in their heads. If I spoke up and told them that the perfect, wealthy David had made an inappropriate comment to me, they would never believe me. They would just assume I was trying to seek attention. So, I did what I had been trained to do my entire life. I stayed quiet. I made myself smaller. I started avoiding family gatherings, making up excuses about being busy with work, just so I wouldn't have to be in the same room as him. But David noticed my absence, and he didn't like being ignored. The quiet, subtle harassment at family dinners soon escalated into something far more terrifying. He found my private phone number, and that is when my silent nightmare truly began. The first text message arrived on a Tuesday night. I was sitting in my small apartment, watching a movie in the dark, when my phone screen lit up. It was an unknown number. "You looked really good in that blue dress at dinner last week. It's a shame you hide yourself so much." My stomach dropped. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't reply. I deleted the message immediately, convincing myself that if I just ignored him, he would eventually get bored and stop. But David didn't stop. He escalated. The messages started coming regularly. Sometimes they were late at night, asking what I was wearing, or telling me exactly what he wanted to do to me. Sometimes he would send them right in the middle of the day, when I knew for a fact he was sitting in the same room as my sister. The sheer audacity of it terrified me. He felt so untouchable, so incredibly secure in his position within our family, that he wasn't even trying to hide his tracks very well. He knew that I was the quiet, invisible sister. He knew that I had spent my entire life avoiding conflict and prioritizing Elena's happiness over my own. I was the perfect victim for him, because he knew, deep down, that I was too scared to speak up. I started having panic attacks. I couldn't sleep. Every time my phone vibrated, my chest would tighten with a suffocating, paralyzing fear. Then came the family gatherings. As the wedding planning went into full swing, My parents demanded that I be present for engagement parties, bridal showers, and dress fittings. David was always there, playing the role of the perfect, doting fiancé for the crowd. But the moment Elena walked out of the room, his mask would drop. During the engagement party at my parents' house, I went into the downstairs bathroom to wash my hands. As I turned to open the door, David pushed his way inside and locked the door behind him. The air left my lungs. I was trapped in a tiny space with a man who was easily twice my size. He pinned me against the bathroom counter, his hands gripping my waist tightly. I tried to push him away, my voice trembling as I begged him to stop, to think about Elena. He just laughed, a low, cruel, arrogant sound. "Elena doesn't need to know," he whispered, pressing his face into my neck. "You're not going to say anything, Sophia. We both know you're too weak. And even if you did, who are they going to believe? The successful lawyer who is about to make their golden child a millionaire? Or the jealous, pathetic sister who nobody cares about?" He kissed my cheek, unlocked the door, and walked out into the living room as if nothing had happened. A minute later, I heard the sound of my parents laughing at one of his jokes. I slid down to the bathroom floor and sobbed into my hands. He was right. That was the most terrifying part of it all. He was absolutely right. If I walked out there and told them what he had just done, my parents wouldn't protect me. They would protect the wedding. For 2 agonizing years, I carried that heavy, sickening secret all by myself. I watched my sister try on wedding dresses, watched my mother cry tears of joy over floral arrangements, and I suffered in absolute silence. But a secret like that is like a poison. If you keep it inside for too long, it eventually destroys you. And as the wedding date crept closer, I realized I couldn't hold it in anymore. It was exactly 1 week before the wedding, 7 days until my sister permanently bound her life to a monster. The pressure inside my chest had reached a breaking point. I had stopped eating. I was physically sick with anxiety every single day. I kept looking at Elena, seeing how genuinely happy she was, and the guilt of letting her marry a predator was eating me alive. I loved my sister. Despite the favoritism, despite the distance between us, she was still my sister. I couldn't let her walk down that aisle blindly. I took screenshots of every single text message David had ever sent me. I saved the terrifying voicemails he had left on my phone late at night. I compiled 2 years of undeniable, physical proof. On a Thursday afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely turn the steering wheel. I was terrified, but for the first time in my life, I was choosing to be brave. I was choosing to finally speak up. My mother and father were sitting at the kitchen table, looking over the final catering menus for the reception. They looked so happy. "Mom, Dad," I said, my voice shaking as I stood in the doorway of the kitchen. They looked up, slightly annoyed by the interruption. "What is it, Sophia?" my mother asked, not looking away from the menus. "We're very busy. The wedding is next weekend." I walked over to the table and placed my phone face up on the granite counter. "I need to show you something," I whispered, tears immediately springing to my eyes. "It's about David. He's not who you think he is. He's been harassing me, sending me inappropriate messages. He cornered me in the bathroom during the engagement party. I have the proof right here. Please, Mom, just look at it. You have to stop the wedding. You have to save Elena." The kitchen went dead silent, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that happens right before a bomb goes off. My mother stared at me for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she picked up my phone. She looked at the screen. She scrolled through the screenshots of the explicit messages. She saw David's name. She saw his phone number. The evidence was absolute. There was no room for misinterpretation. I held my breath, waiting for the shock. I waited for her to gasp, to hug me, to call my father over in horror. I waited for my parents to finally, for once in their lives, protect their youngest daughter. Instead, my mother's face hardened into a mask of pure, icy fury. She didn't look at the messages with horror. She looked at me with disgust. She tossed my phone across the kitchen island. It hit the wall and clattered onto the floor, the screen cracking against the tiles. "You are just jealous," she whispered, her voice vibrating with a terrifying, venomous rage. I froze, completely unable to process what she had just said. "What?" My father stood up from the table, his face red with anger. "How dare you, Sophia? How dare you come into this house, 1 week before your sister's wedding, and fabricate this disgusting lie?" "It's not a lie," I cried out, pointing to the phone on the floor. "The messages are right there. His number is right there." "He sent them to me." "You faked them," my mother screamed, finally losing control. "You probably used an app to fake the number. You have always been jealous of Elena, always. She is beautiful, she is successful, and she is marrying into one of the most respectable, wealthy families in this state. And you? You have nothing. So you decided to create a sick, twisted lie to destroy her happiness because you can't stand seeing her succeed." I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. My own parents were looking at physical evidence of my abuse, and they were choosing to protect a wealthy abuser over their own flesh and blood. "Mom, please," I begged, falling to my knees to pick up the cracked phone. "I'm not lying. Why would I do this? He hurt me. He terrified me. Please believe me." My father walked around the table, grabbed me by the arm, and pulled me to my feet with a force that actually hurt. "You are a disgrace to this family," he spat, his eyes filled with absolute contempt. "We are not calling off this wedding. We are not calling off this wedding. We are not insulting David's family with these pathetic delusions. Get your things, Sophia. Get out of this house, and do not show your face at the wedding next week. You are no longer welcome in our lives." I was hyperventilating, sobbing uncontrollably as my father physically dragged me toward the front door. I had finally found the courage to speak the truth, and my reward was being thrown out onto the street like garbage. But the nightmare wasn't over, because I still had one last, desperate attempt to make. I had to warn my sister. I stood on the sidewalk outside my parents' house, the cold evening wind biting at my skin. My tears had dried, leaving my face feeling tight and hollow. My parents had just thrown me out of the house. They had chosen a wealthy predator over their own daughter. But my mind wasn't entirely on my own pain. It was focused completely on Elena. I couldn't just walk away and let her marry him. I knew my parents would never tell her the truth. They would spin a story about how I had a mental breakdown and tried to ruin the wedding out of jealousy. I had to get to her first. I had to look her in the eyes and show her the evidence before David could manipulate her. I got into my car and drove directly to the luxury high-rise apartment Elena and David had recently purchased together. I knew David was out at a bachelor party dinner with his groomsmen, which meant Elena would be home alone, finalizing the seating charts. When she answered the door, she looked exhausted but happy, wearing sweatpants and holding a binder full of wedding plans. Her smile faded instantly when she saw my cracked phone in my hand, my red, swollen eyes, and my trembling frame. "Sophia, what's wrong? Are you okay?" she asked, pulling me inside the apartment and shutting the door. I didn't waste any time. I couldn't afford to. I sat her down on the velvet sofa, opened my cracked phone, and pulled up the screenshots. I handed the phone to her, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the device. "Elena, you have to look at this," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I am so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I was terrified. It's David. He's been harassing me for 2 years. He cornered me in the bathroom at your engagement party. Please, You have to call off the wedding. He's a monster. I watched my sister's face as she scrolled through the images. I watched her read the explicit, terrifying messages her fiancé had sent to her own sister. I watched her read the timestamps, perfectly aligning with the family dinners and holidays we had all spent together. For a moment, the apartment was completely silent. I waited for her to scream. I waited for her to throw the phone, to break down crying, to thank me for saving her from a lifetime of misery. Instead, she slowly placed the phone face down on the coffee table. She didn't cry. She didn't look horrified. She looked at me with the exact same expression my mother had used just an hour earlier. Pure, unadulterated disgust. "How much did you pay someone to edit these?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I stared at her in disbelief. "What? Elena, no. I didn't edit anything. Those are real. Look at the number. It's his personal cell phone. People can spoof phone numbers, Sophia," she snapped, standing up from the couch. She crossed her arms over her chest, glaring down at me. "Mom called me 10 minutes ago. She warned me you were coming. She told me you had a complete mental breakdown in the kitchen and tried to frame David just to ruin my wedding." "Mom is lying to protect his money," I cried out, standing up to face her. "Elena, please. Why would I lie about something like this? Why would I destroy my relationship with my own family? I have nothing to gain from this. I am trying to save you." "You have everything to gain," Elena shouted, her perfectly manicured facade finally shattering. "You have always been jealous of me. Always. I have the perfect career, the perfect fiancé, and the perfect life. You have spent your entire life hiding in the background, being a miserable, average nobody. You saw me getting my happily ever after, and you couldn't stand it. You wanted David for yourself, and when he rejected you, you made up this sick, twisted fantasy. I felt the last remaining piece of my heart shatter into a million jagged pieces. The sister I was trying to save was calling me a jealous liar. The family I had spent my entire life trying to please had completely turned their backs on me. "He's going to hurt you, Elena," I whispered, the fight completely draining out of my body. "When the cameras are off and the wedding is over, he is going to hurt you. And when he does, you will remember this moment." "Get out of my apartment," she hissed, pointing toward the door. "You are not my sister. You are a disgusting, pathetic liar. Don't you ever try to contact me or David ever again." I picked up my broken phone from the coffee table. I didn't say another word. I walked out of her apartment, stepped into the elevator, and let the doors close on my family forever. The wedding happened exactly 7 days later. I spent that entire Saturday sitting on the floor of my tiny apartment, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the wall. I knew the exact timeline of the day. I knew when the string quartet started playing. I knew when my father walked her down the aisle. I knew the exact moment she looked into the eyes of a predator and said, "I do." I didn't cry that day. I think my body had simply run out of the capacity to feel pain. My family had successfully erased me from their lives, and in return, I decided to erase them from mine. The following Monday, I changed my phone number. I deleted all my social media accounts. I packed up my tiny apartment and moved to a different city, 3 hours away, where nobody knew my name, my history, or the heavy baggage I carried. The next 5 years were a masterclass in survival and reinvention. Without the constant, suffocating weight of my family's expectations holding me down, I finally learned how to breathe. I stopped making myself small. I threw myself into my graphic design career with a fierce, quiet determination. I started taking freelance clients on the side, building a portfolio that eventually allowed me to start my own design agency. I met wonderful, genuine people who loved me for exactly who I was, without demanding perfection. I went to therapy. I healed. I built a beautiful, peaceful life from the ashes of the one my parents had burned to the ground. During those 5 years, I didn't hear a single word from my family. Not a birthday card, not a holiday text from an unknown number. Complete, absolute silence. I assumed Elena was living her perfect, high society life with David, and my parents were happily playing the roles of the proud in-laws. I accepted that I would never receive an apology, and I found peace in that acceptance. But I had forgotten one very crucial rule about the universe. The truth has a funny way of surviving in the dark. You can bury it, you can ignore it, and you can call it a liar. But eventually, the truth always digs its way out. I want to pause here for just a moment. If you have ever been the black sheep of your family, if you have ever been called a liar for speaking the truth, and if you know the incredible strength it takes to walk away and build a life of your own, please take a second to subscribe to this small channel of ours. We are building a beautiful community of strong, resilient women here, and your support truly means the world to us. Let's return to the story, because what happened next is something my sister never could have imagined. For 5 long years, the silence between me and my family remained unbroken. It was a heavy, impenetrable wall that neither side attempted to breach. In the beginning, the silence hurt. I won't pretend it didn't. There were nights during those early years in my new city when I would walk past a bakery, smell fresh bread, and suddenly think of my mother. I would wonder if she ever looked at the empty chair at their Thanksgiving table and felt even a fraction of the heartbreak I felt. But as the years passed, that silence transformed from a source of pain into a source of profound peace. My design agency flourished. I hired a team of incredibly talented women, moved into a beautiful office space with exposed brick walls, and bought a small house with a garden in the suburbs. I was happy. Genuinely, truly happy. I had stopped looking over my shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up with me. But the past rarely stays buried forever. I received the first piece of news entirely by accident. I was having lunch with a former college roommate who had recently moved to my city for work. We were catching up over coffee when she suddenly paused, looking at me with a hesitant, cautious expression. "Sophia," she began, setting her coffee cup down. "I don't know if you keep in touch with anyone from back home, but have you seen the news about your brother-in-law?" My stomach gave a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. I hadn't heard that name in 5 years. "David?" "No. I haven't spoken to my family since before the wedding. What happened?" My friend pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and slid it across the table toward me. It was an article from a major local newspaper in my hometown. The headline felt like a physical blow to my chest. Prominent corporate attorney David Sterling arrested amid multiple allegations of harassment and fraud. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling as I read the article. David hadn't just been harassing me. After the wedding, his behavior had only escalated. Emboldened by his wealth and his untouchable status, he had spent the last 5 years using his position at the law firm to systematically harass and intimidate several female junior associates. But that wasn't the worst part. According to the article, the police investigation had uncovered a secret, secondary phone David used. On that phone, they found explicit text messages, terrifying voicemails, and undeniable evidence of predatory behavior directed at multiple women, including, the article carefully noted without naming names, extended members of his own family. I handed the phone back to my friend, feeling completely numb. He hadn't changed. He hadn't magically become a good man just because he put a ring on my sister's finger. He had continued to be the exact same monster I had tried to warn my family about 5 years ago. "Is Elena okay?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The article says she filed for divorce the day he was arrested," my friend replied softly. "They are saying it's going to be one of the ugliest, most public divorce trials in the state. Her face has been all over the local news." I drove home that afternoon in a state of absolute shock. For 5 years, I had carried the heavy, suffocating label of a jealous, home-wrecking liar. My parents had kicked me out into the street because they believed I had fabricated a sick fantasy just to ruin my perfect sister's life. And now, the entire world knew the truth. The public collapse of David Sterling's life happened quickly, and it was brutal. Over the next 3 weeks, I watched from afar as the scandal played out in the media. Women who had been silenced by his money and his power were finally coming forward, sharing stories that sounded sickeningly identical to mine. I didn't reach out to Elena. I didn't reach out to my parents. I didn't gloat, and I certainly didn't call them to say, "I told you so." The old Sophia, the terrified, approval-seeking girl who just wanted her family to love her, would have rushed back home to comfort them. She would have helped them pick up the pieces of their shattered reputation. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was a 30-year-old woman who knew exactly what her peace of mind had cost. I assumed they were too ashamed to ever contact me again. I assumed they would quietly deal with the divorce, bury their heads in the sand, and continue pretending I didn't exist. But I had underestimated the crushing weight of their own guilt. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk in my home office, reviewing a design contract for a new client. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any packages, and I rarely had unannounced visitors. I walked to the front door, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled it open. My breath caught in my throat. Standing on my front porch, getting soaked by the cold rain, were my mother and my father. They looked incredibly old. The polished, arrogant, high society facade they had worn so proudly at the engagement party was completely gone. My father's shoulders were hunched, and his face was pale and lined with exhaustion. My mother looked entirely broken, clutching a wet tissue in her trembling hands. We stared at each other in absolute, stunning silence for what felt like an eternity. "Sophia," my mother finally whispered, her voice cracking as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "My beautiful, beautiful girl." She took a step forward, reaching her arms out as if she expected me to pull her into a warm embrace. She expected the quiet, obedient daughter to instantly forgive her. I didn't step back, but I didn't step forward either. I stood perfectly still, my posture straight, my expression completely unreadable. I let my silence build an invisible, impenetrable wall between us. My mother slowly lowered her arms, realizing that the daughter she had thrown away 5 years ago was no longer standing in front of her. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked. My voice wasn't angry. It wasn't cruel. It was just incredibly, devastatingly cold. My father swallowed hard, taking off his wet hat. "Sophia, we saw the news. We saw the police reports. Elena found his secret phone. She saw the messages he sent to those women, and she saw the old messages. The ones he sent to you before the wedding." He stopped, his voice breaking. He looked down at the porch, unable to meet my eyes. "We were wrong, Sophia," my mother sobbed, taking a desperate step closer. "We were so terribly wrong. We thought you were just stressed. We thought you were jealous. We didn't want to believe that David could do something so monstrous. But we know now. We know you were telling the truth. We know you were just trying to save your sister. We know you were telling the truth." Those were the words I had begged to hear 5 years ago. I had spent countless nights sobbing into my pillow, desperately wishing my parents would wake up and realize I wasn't a liar. But hearing those words now, standing in the doorway of the beautiful, peaceful home I had built entirely by myself, they meant absolutely nothing. "Elena is a mess, Sophia," my mother pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. "She is broken. She's going through a horrific divorce, and her reputation is ruined. We are her parents, but she needs her sister right now. She needs you to forgive her. We all need you to forgive us. Please, Sophia, please come home." I looked at the 2 people who had brought me into this world. I looked at the parents who had chosen the illusion of a perfect, wealthy marriage over the safety of their own flesh and blood. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I stood in the doorway of my home, looking at the two people who were supposed to protect me from the monsters of the world. They were standing in the cold rain, begging for my forgiveness, begging me to come back and fix the broken pieces of a family that had happily thrown me away. "Come home?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a quiet, steady whisper. "Yes," my father pleaded, looking up at me with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. "We can be a family again, Sophia. We can put this ugly nightmare behind us. Elena wants to see you. She wants to apologize to you in person. We all do." I looked at my mother's hopeful, tear-stained face, and then at my father's trembling hands. 12 years ago, I would have packed a bag in a heartbeat. I would have rushed back to their house, wiped Elena's tears, and spent the rest of my life trying to prove that I was finally worthy of their love. But as I looked at them now, I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, overwhelming sense of clarity. "You didn't come here because you miss me," I said softly, the truth slicing through the heavy, damp air like a razor. My mother flinched. "Sophia, how can you say that? Of course we miss you." "No, you don't," I corrected her, my tone completely devoid of anger. "You came here because the illusion is broken. You came here because the entire city knows that your golden son-in-law is a predator, and your perfect daughter's life is falling apart. You came here because the guilt of what you did to me is finally suffocating you, and you want me to absolve you of it. You want me to tell you that you are still good parents." They both stared at me, completely stunned into silence. They had absolutely no defense, because they knew I was telling the truth. 5 years ago, I continued, stepping slightly out onto the porch, so I was looking them directly in the eye. "I stood in your kitchen, hyperventilating and terrified. I showed you physical, undeniable proof that the man sleeping under your roof was harassing me. And instead of protecting your youngest daughter, you called me a jealous, pathetic liar. You physically dragged me to the front door and threw me out into the street. We were wrong," my mother sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "We were so wrong." "Being wrong is buying the wrong brand of coffee, Mom," I said coldly. "What you did was a choice. You chose his money. You chose the wedding. You chose your social status over my safety. And Elena? Elena looked at the evidence and accused me of faking it just to steal her perfect life." "She's sorry," my father interrupted, his voice cracking. "She's broken, Sophia. She has lost everything. And I am truly, genuinely sorry that she is hurting," I replied. "Nobody deserves what David did to her. But her pain does not erase my trauma. It does not erase the 5 years I spent rebuilding my life from absolute zero, because my own family treated me like garbage." I took a deep breath, feeling a massive, invisible weight finally lift off my shoulders. "I forgive you," I said quietly. My parents looked up, a sudden, desperate flash of hope appearing in their eyes. "I forgive you," I repeated, "because holding on to this anger is exhausting, and I refuse to carry it anymore." But forgiveness does not mean access. Forgiveness does not mean you get to walk back into my life just because it is suddenly convenient for your conscience. "Sophia, please," my mother begged, reaching for my hand. I stepped back, gently but firmly pulling my hand away. "I hope Elena heals," I told them. "I hope you all find peace. But my home is here now. My family are the people who believed in me when I had absolutely nothing. You made your choice 5 years ago. I am simply honoring it." I didn't wait for them to argue. I didn't wait for another round of desperate apologies. I stepped backward into my house, took one last look at the people who used to be my parents, and slowly closed the heavy wooden door. I engaged the deadbolt. The sharp, metallic click echoed through the quiet hallway, sealing the past exactly where it belonged, on the outside. I walked over to the large bay window in my living room and watched through the blinds. A few minutes later, I saw my parents slowly walk back down the driveway in the pouring rain. They got into their car and drove away, merging into the traffic until they completely disappeared from view. I didn't cry. My heart didn't break. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a cup of hot tea, and sat down on my comfortable sofa. I heard through the news several months later that David Sterling was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for his crimes. The divorce was finalized, and Elena was left with a fraction of the life she thought she was going to have. She moved back in with my parents, and they are now living a very quiet, isolated life, entirely cut off from the high society circles they once valued above everything else. Some people might hear this story and think I was cruel. Some people might say that family is family, no matter how toxic they are, and that I should have welcomed my sister back with open arms when she finally realized I was telling the truth. But those people have never had their truth weaponized against them. Forgiveness is a beautiful thing. It frees your soul from the poison of resentment. But reconciliation is an entirely different matter. Reconciliation requires trust, and the trust my family shattered on the night they kicked me out of the house was impossible to rebuild. I don't hate them anymore, but I don't need them either. I am a successful business owner. I am a survivor of emotional abuse, and I am a woman who learned how to build her own table when her family refused to give her a seat. My name is Sophia. I was never the golden child. I was the sister they tried to silence, but I survived the storm they created, and I used the rain to grow a beautiful, peaceful life. And nobody will ever call me a liar again. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today and listening to Sophia's incredible journey. It is deeply painful when the people who are supposed to protect us choose to look the other way. But Sophia's story reminds us that the truth always, eventually, finds its way into the light. And walking away from toxicity is sometimes the bravest thing we can do. If this story resonated with you, please let me know by leaving a comment below. I read every single one, and I would absolutely love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a hard boundary with a family member to protect your own peace? If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. It is the greatest compliment you can give to our small channel, and it allows us to keep bringing these powerful, heartfelt stories to you every single week. Until next time, take care of yourselves, protect your peace, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for demanding the respect you deserve. Have a beautifully blessed day, and I will see you in the next story.